Good day, everyone. This is Warner B. Reponte, and I'm a senior high school teacher from Sultan Ali Dimaporo Memorial Integrated School. And today we are going to discuss about formulating and evaluating action research questions and hypotheses. So, of course, this topic is very important because this is where we are going to answer questions, and also this is for me personally, this is like one of the key points in an action research. So before I will discuss to you on how to formulate and evaluate your research questions and make hypotheses, let's move on first our today's objectives. So of course, at the end of the session, you teachers participants should be able to first enumerate the criteria for good action research questions. Yes, we are going to discuss what are the criterias, and these criterias will be your guide in creating your action research questions. The next is you are going to formulate good action research questions and their corresponding hypotheses. So hopefully, after our discussion, you could create your own action research questions. I know that you already have your interventions in mind, and you could use those interventions na makabuhat and formulate the good action research questions. And lastly, we're going to evaluate the quality of action research questions formulated based on the 5 criteria for good research questions. As I have mentioned earlier, there are criterias, and those 5 criterias we're going to use so that we can evaluate if your research questions that you've made is a quality action research questions. So let's go ahead and let's discuss first what is research questions. Well, when we say research question, a research question narrows down the purpose of a study and specifies what the action researcher expects to find at the end of it. So like what I have mentioned earlier, for me personally, it is one of the key points in an action research to have research questions. Why? Because your topic is in a general form. Like, for example, maybe you want to have an intervention on how online teaching or how e-classroom improves your learners' performance, then that's the general. And then after that, you have your purpose. But an action research question is, it narrows down the main point, how and why your intervention or action research is important, because this is where you can specify your answer or the purpose of the study. Next is a research question may be stated in quantitative or qualitative way. So there are 2 types of research. The first one is the quantitative and the qualitative. Well, for me personally, I am an action researcher which love to have a quantitative and action research, but of course we are going also to discuss on how to make a qualitative action research questions. Then, in the research questions, we need to consider the initial purpose of the study, the desired outcomes after intervention has been implemented, and the insights from your review of literature. So, like what I have mentioned, before kasi tayo gagawa ng research questions, there are a lot of readings that you made. Readings, and also, since you already have an intervention in mind, you have planned it already, then you read what the topic about or your intervention is about, then that's the time that you can formulate research questions, because you can consider the purpose of your study. Maybe what's the main purpose? For me, as an action research teacher, it should help the learners, especially for me, especially on their performance. And also, what would be your desired outcomes would be. Then, lastly, like what I have mentioned, is of course you need to read more on related literature, because it would help you make research questions. Because if you have read about your topic, the good thing about it is that maka-create ka na ng idea na ito pala ang possible na lalabas sa intervention na ginawa mo. So yes, I think we are clear and we're done with the definition of research questions. By the way, if you have questions, you can just type or go to chat box, and then I will try to answer all your questions. And maybe after the discussion, I could give you my personal email. So if you could contact me, or if you have questions on this particular topic, I can also answer it. So since we're okay with it, so now next to that, a research question is your research hypothesis. What is a research hypothesis then? A research hypothesis is a tentative answer to the research question, and then the action researcher makes a prediction about the outcome of the planned intervention, and then the prediction is based on the results of past researches that focus on the same subject as the action researchers study. Like what I have mentioned earlier, it is very important as a researcher as a whole, not only an action researcher, but if you are a researcher, you need to read a lot of readings, articles, or past or related literature, or past action research, which is somewhat similar to your topic or intervention. Why? Because it would help you creating a hypothesis. Your hypothesis is hindi siya yung sagot, but this is more likely your prediction or outcome sa pwedeng, or sa outcome sa pwede mong intervention. Okay, so I guess we're clear. So if you have like, I'll just have to short recap. So if you have an action research questions, it should be followed by your research hypothesis. So I believe we are clear with it. So I have mentioned earlier what the 5 criteria of good action research. So let's move on and discuss all about it. Okay, so here are the 5 criteria for good action research question. First is your action research question should be clearly stated. What do you mean by that? Well, the action research question should be easily understood by the readers. So let's look at the following and let's compare how these examples, or how the first example, the unclear one, different from the clear action research questions. Okay, I'm gonna read. The unclear is, do leisure activities enhance students' critical thinking? And then that's unclear. Well, if yung tanong natin is meron bang kasagutan dyan, there is a question, an answer to that question. But is it clear? Let's go to the clear part. Do puzzles enhance students' critical thinking skills? Ito mas klaro. Why? The main reason why it is not unclear, since there are a lot of leisure activities po na pwedeng gawin. Not only puzzle, there are a lot of board games, there are yung leisure activities, even watching movies, listening to music is one of leisure activities. But in the unclear version, or in the unclear part question, hindi po yun in-specify or hindi klaro kung anong leisure activities ang gagawin. Pero sa clear part, it's very clear na puzzle po yung gagawin na leisure activities. And then, what critical thinking? Or, sorry, it's also unclear because the puzzles will enhance the students' critical thinking skills. So I hope it's clear. So we just have to be specific on a particular intervention that you want to achieve. Okay, I could give you an example. For me, last year I had my my research. So I had a flipped classroom, which is I'm happy because yung flipped classroom po is like a blended classroom, which is very relevant today. That's the good thing about it. So what I did is that the question is, or what is, it's clear, what is the student's performance in grade 11 TVL using the flipped classroom. So I'm specific to what intervention or what strategy that I am using to help them enhance their academic performance. So we just have to be clear, and then when your reader will read it, then they would understand. In this example, puzzle pala yung leisure activities, because leisure. Oh, when you will just say leisure activities, parang vague siya. Okay, so I guess we're clear. So number one, that is the first criteria that we're going to remind ourselves. It should be clearly stated. Next is it should be significant. Ano ba yung significant? The action research question should contribute to the body of knowledge. The results of the study should benefit students, teachers, and schools. I believe as an action researcher myself, as an action researcher, you are making something, an intervention to help not only yourself, but also for the learners. That's our main concern kasi. Because if you are a classroom teacher, your concern is how your learners maybe be more productive or understood your lesson, or even help with their behavior. I'm not only focusing on the strategy or the discussion itself, but there are a lot of interventions that would help them in their there are a lot of interventions that would help in their behavioral aspect also. So like what I have mentioned, it should be significant because your study should benefit the school and the learners and even your co-teachers. So I'll give you an example. We have here two examples, the not significant and the significant. Sorry. First is, does the use of pastel colored paper increase reading time? Then let's do text related illustrations increased reading time? So now, why do you think that the first one is not significant? Because the focus here is the pastel colored paper. So what particular intervention did, as a teacher, you use to help the learners? Because a pastel colored paper is already just a product, hindi yun ginawa, right? But then if you will go to the significant, do text related illustrations, which the text related illustrations here is your intervention. Ito na yung significant, and that would benefit the learners. Since ginawa mo yun, so there is now an increased reading time. So it is clear so kung ano yung benepisyo na makukuha ng estudyante because of what you did. Okay? So again, let's have a review. It should be clearly stated. Next, it should be significant. And third one, it should be ethical. Yes, ethics in research should always be observed. Actually, before we started our session, Sir Bridget asked me for ethical consideration that that our discussion is recorded. So it's one way also. So as a researcher, we have to observe that, we have to be ethical. So why? How does your research question become ethical and non-ethical? I'm going to discuss that. Okay. First is the action research question should respect human dignity and rights of the participants. And also, it should not create any form of harm to the participants of the study. So it should not be biased. And the other one, hindi siya pwedeng makaharm or makasira sa mga respondents mo. Okay, I will give you an example. First, the non-ethical and the ethical. First one is, does breakfast deprivation cause low attention span in children? And then we have here the ethical way of asking question. How does having breakfast help increase attention span in children? Okay, why do you think isang basa parang wala namang difference, but how the unethical became an unethical? Well, if you will observe, this breakfast deprivation, so it means that your respondents are being deprived from breakfast. So you are being biased. Siguro yung punto ng ng action research mo is how breakfast or how eating breakfast affects the learners. But when you say kasi, when you use the word breakfast deprivation, you have already assumed na na-deprive na yung mga bata ng breakfast, yung mga respondents mo. So there is already a judgment on that. So, well, and also, it causes low attention span in children. So you have, as in this particular question, you have assumed that the breakfast deprivation could cause the low attention span in children. So there is already a judgment here. But he, on the other hand, on the ethical way of asking, same topic po, pero ethical way, how does having breakfast help increase attention span in children? Now, you used having breakfast. Why? Why is it different from breakfast deprivation? Because having breakfast, your participants could, or they have an option to not to eat their breakfast or to have it. Well, for me personally, I don't like eating breakfast at 6 a.m. I usually have brunched. So dito po, wala po siyang judgment. And also, the good thing is help increase attention span in children, in more on a positive note na if you will eat breakfast pala, then there is a chance that the attention span of your learners will increase. See? So again, the third criteria that we have to be in mind is we have to be ethical. Okay? So next is the fourth one, or the fourth criteria. It should be feasible. What does feasible mean? Well, your action research question should be doable in terms of resources, in time, and as well as your skills as a researcher or as an action researcher. Well, how does an action research question become feasible? Example, do board games help enhance the problem-solving skills of pupils in the country? Why it is not feasible? This question is a bad question since it's not feasible. First one, hindi nyo po in-specify kung anong board games. There are a lot of board games. Then, ito yung pangalawa. It enhanced the problem-solving skills of pupils in the country. We're talking about the pupils in the whole Philippines here. Siguro po if there are like 17 million pupils and hindi pa po specify kung anong grade level, so maybe from grade kinder ba yun? Yes, kinder. From grade 6 na pupils, and then you will get the sample out of that population. Maybe you could finish it mga 10 years. Just kidding. But the main point here is sobra pong laki ng laki po or lawak ng research natin. So that's why it's not for me as an action researcher and as a classroom teacher, hindi po yun feasible sa akin. But how does an action research question become feasible or kaya, doable? Isang basa lang, I know this research could do or could be finished in one year because yun po yung binigay ng research po or sa division office po na timeline na pwede nyo pong gawin yung action research natin. Nasa birth po, sorry, I forgot po the memo or the DO rather, but if I have time, I'm gonna chat you all with the guidelines. Yes, so let's move on to the feasible part here. Does playing the board Moko help develop the computational skills of grade 4 pupils in school X? Why is it feasible? Bakit ito doable in 1 year, for example? Because it is specific yung board game na yun. It's the Sumuko. Then, what is the skill na pwedeng i-develop? The computational skills po nila. Anong grado? It's clear that grade 4. Pero, pag sabihin mong grade 4 lang, pwedeng grade 4 ng Hulanao del Norte. Sobrang dami pa din po yun. So, but if you will say pupils in school X or in my case, in Sultan Ali Dimaporo Memorial Integrated School, it is very clear that I will be having my intervention in this group of students, the grade 4 pupils of SADMIS. So it's feasible? Yes, it is feasible. Again po, in making an action research question, the best thing that you have to be reminded of is, of course, it should be feasible. It should be doable. Kaya po ng resources. By the way, resources also. Resources in a way kung kaya ba ng budget natin. There are researches that are birth funded, and I'm glad, and I'm just want to share to you. I'm glad that last year I was funded, and then resources yun. But if hindi naman kaya ng resources, then magkakaproblema po din tayo. And then the time is very important kasi I just want to share this. In making an intervention, your research, remember, it will be approved by maybe you will pass your research by January. It will be approved by maybe by March or by April, and then you will start your study by June, and then it should be end by December. So yung timeline po natin and yung topics na pwede natin gawa ng intervention should be from June to somewhat November po. We should be mindful on that. Why? Because if we are going to make an action research for January to March, pwede naman. But the submission po or the timeline na binigay sa atin, baka hindi po natin makuha or kayanin. So maybe if you are very talaga na pwedeng this intervention is good for your January or February lessons, then pwede nyo po yang gawin and submit it by that particular year. Or as an action researcher, you can have it also as your own research. Maybe you can have it to you can use it for to attend some research forum. Okay, so again, let's move on. Like what I have mentioned, the fourth criteria is your action research question should be feasible. And lastly, it leads to making an action. Dapat mayroong ginawa, mayroong gagawin. Okay, here, the action research question must lead to taking an action, trying out an intervention for the purpose of improving a learning and teaching situation. So as a classroom teacher, my main point or my main my main duty as an action researcher is to help the learners improve their learning, so or their teaching. Now, I will give you an example. It does not. The first example, it does not lead to making an action. First is, do girls speak better English than boys? Why? It's just a question, but walang gagawin yung hindi nakita sa question mo kung ano yung gagawin nila. Pero in this particular question that leads or that help learners improve is, I'll read. Does journal writing enhance the English speaking skills of pupils? So, ano yung gagawin ng mga bata mo? Of course, they will do the journal writing. And how this journal writing enhance their English speaking skills. So I believe we are clear with the 5 criteria for good action research questions. So if you have clarifications, you can write at the chat box, and we will really try to answer all the possible questions that you actually typing. Okay, so let's move on now to the next part. I have mentioned already that in making an action research questions could be qualitative or quantitative. So let's move on first, the types of action research questions. There are 2. of course, since there are two types of an action research. The first one is quantitative research questions are those that ask about quantitative variables and require numerical data. So this is my favorite part. This is my favorite type of action research because I am more into quantitative action research. So what are the examples? In quantitative action research questions, we are expected to deliver numbers. We are expected to have data and analyze the data, numerical data. So numbers po talaga yun. First question. This is the example. Do final scores improve after the intervention? So here, ano yung uh, question na ito? It talks about the scores. So it means that meron bang na-improve or meron bang nagawa yung intervention na ginawa mo and then to help their scores. So obviously, the answer for this is a numerical data rather. Next, are grades of those students exposed to the intervention higher than those who were not? So here you are comparing students who are exposed and who are not exposed to the intervention. So anong gagawin natin or paano ito masagutan? So numbers din. So we are talking about the scores. So sa madaling salita, if your research is more on, if your intervention is more on helping learners achieve their academic achievement or academic performance, then you can have the quantitative research questions because we're talking about the scores here. The pre-test, the post-test, and then your the pre-test, your intervention, and the post-test. Okay, so we're clear. Next one is the qualitative research questions. Qualitative research questions are those that ask for descriptions and narratives. So this is now for the this is now for the qualitative research action researches. So one example, how does parental involvement affect students' attitude toward school? So hindi po yun masasagutan ng numero kasi how po siya. And then aside from that is we're talking the subject or the topic here is parental involvement. So therefore, there will be a survey or a narrative or a descriptions on getting the answer. So kung if ever kung ganun na po yung mga sagutan, yung descriptions or narratives, then mapufall na po siya sa qualitative research questions. And then another example. In what ways do or does the intervention help students understand the lesson better? So in this example, it is more on the narrative. It could be your observation as a researcher, and also it could also help if you have like journals to be based on, so that you would know how the intervention helped students' understanding. Okay, so I believe we are clear with the two types of research questions. The quantitative, which deals about the numbers or the answers, possible answers, or numerical data, and then the qualitative research questions, the answers here, these questions answers descriptions or narratives. So we're clear with that. So since we're done with the questions, so next is yun na po yung research hypothesis natin. I have discussed a while ago an overview of a research hypothesis. So a research hypothesis is the tentative answer to the research question. It is the hypothesis of interest in the study, the statement that the action researchers want to support. So more likely, your research hypothesis, ito po yung gusto nating mangyari sa research natin. Pero like what I have mentioned earlier, hindi po yan basta-basta na you have created it out sa gusto mo lang. It is always based on Your research hypothesis is always based on your readings, past researchers, articles, and somewhat related topics to your the related articles to your topics rather. So here, there is this is an example of a research hypothesis. So there is a difference in the scores of students who were given the intervention and those who were not. So as an action researcher, you would know or you assume that there is a difference between the group of students. Yung isa is merong intervention and yung isa wala. So there is a difference in the scores between these two. So ito na yung research hypothesis na nagawa mo. Okay? Okay, I'll give you another example. Halimbawa, you want to have an intervention on approaches, maybe 7 E's. This is science related because I'm science major. So 7 E's learning approach. So you want to as an intervention, you want to make a lesson based on the 7 E's. So therefore, you can have two group of learners. The one is exposed to the intervention, and the one is the non 7E's or na hindi na exposed sa intervention na gusto mo. So therefore, since you have made this intervention kasi based on your interest, based on your reading, so you want to know if there is a difference between the two ba. It could be a positive or a negative difference. So it's depend on your research or in your purpose of your study. Okay. So I guess we're clear with the hypothesis. So let's move on to the kabaliktaran ng hypothesis natin, which is the null hypothesis. This is the opposite of the research hypothesis. Its purpose is to be nullified or rejected in order for the action researcher to accept or supports his or her hypothesis. So, ano ba yung null hypothesis? This is the complete opposite of your hypothesis, research hypothesis. Magkaiba po yung research hypothesis at null hypothesis. Ano ba yon? Yung null hypothesis, ito po yung gusto natin i-reject. Why? If we're going to reject this, then we can accept our hypothesis. Example of a null hypothesis. There is no difference in the scores of students who were given the intervention and those who were not. If we'll go back to this, there is a difference. This is more on your research hypothesis, and then if we'll go back to the null hypothesis, there is no difference. So this is now the opposite. So now, ano ba yung pwedeng gamitin? Both could be used in your action research. Why? If your null hypothesis will be rejected, then automatic your research hypothesis will be accepted. Okay, so let's move on and discuss muna sa two types of hypothesis. There are two, non-directional, and there is also what we call the directional hypothesis. Non-directional hypothesis po do not specify where the difference lies, which group is higher or better. Whereas the directional hypothesis does the opposite. It is the research hypothesis that states the difference favored by the action researcher. So more likely, I'll give you an example about it. Yung non-directional, hindi po siya na-mention kung sino yung higher. Ito ba yung na-expose na intervention mo or hindi? So it's a safer part. But in directional, it's clearly stated na yung estudyante or yung group of learners na ginawan mo ng intervention have the higher scores compared to hindi na-expose ng intervention mo. I'll give you an example. So this is now the example of non-directional hypothesis. So the null hypothesis here is the scores of students who were given the intervention will be equal to those who were not given the same. So it's safe. It could be equal. So your research hypothesis here is the scores of students who were given the intervention will not be equal to those who were not given the same. So if you read these two, the non-directional hypothesis actually talks about or did not talk about kung sino yung mas taas, mas mataas na scores or sino yung mas mababa. So let's move on to directional, how non-directional and directional differ. First is the null hypothesis muna tayo. The scores of students who were given the intervention will be either lower or equal to those students not given the same. So it is now clear na ang gusto natin is, of course, the intervention or the learners, group of learners who were given the intervention will be either be lower or equal. Since it's null hypothesis, gusto natin yung i-reject. If we will reject that, then let's move on na dayon sa directional hypothesis. The research hypothesis here in the directional would be the scores of students who were given the intervention will be higher than those of students not given the same. It's all clear. It's that this type, the directional hypothesis, is favored by the action researcher, because if you have the intervention, you want your intervention to be of help of your learners or of your organization. So that's why it can be higher, or it can be higher than the previous practice or what is being taught in the classroom. Okay, so I believe we are clear with how to create action research questions. We have discussed already the criteria. We have also discussed the hypothesis or types of research questions, action research questions muna. And then now we're done with the how to create hypothesis. So let's have an activity. The first activity or your intervention now is the use of online teaching. Why I am using this topic, because it's relevant today. Most universities and other high schools will be using online teaching, and well, sa aming school we're using modular because wala po merong internet, but not all learners have the access. So the modular teaching, or the modular way of teaching is much better. So what if this is an example? Your intervention is the use of online teaching. Can you make questions po or can you make questions or action research questions out of this topic? Maybe you can jot down, you can type your answer on the chat box. So, and let's check if it's correct. I'm gonna give you maybe 30 seconds. You just have to remember the 5 criteria. So your 30 seconds starts now. By the way, while you are answering, typing, and thinking, I'll be talking on the background. So by the way, you have to remember the 5 criteria that I have mentioned earlier, and it should be clearly stated. It should be ethical. It should be feasible. It should be there should be some reason about it, and also like what I've mentioned, it should be doable. And in making also action research questions, I hope that it's clear. It's clear in a way that sa isang basahan lang alam na ng reader mo kung ano yung pwede or possible na nasagot sa research mo. Kasi when I will be reading researches or articles, one of the things that I will check is the question. How these questions are relevant to the study also. Okay, so yes, let's try to check what are the possible. It doesn't mean po kung hindi po nabanggit dito yung mga kasagutan natin, it doesn't mean it's wrong, okay? Because you have your different schools man. So let's just try lang. here. Number one possible question here is that what is the scores or the academic performance in Earth and Life Science of grade 11 learners using the online teaching? So here, medyo vague lang po siya kasi we could also be using your school or using online teaching in, for me, Sultan Ali Dimaporo Memorial Integrated School. And then what would be the other question? Is there a significant difference in the scores in Earth and Life Science between the pre-test and the post-test of the learners using online teaching in Sultan Ali Dimapuro Memorial Integrated School? So in this particular questions, himay-himayin natin if na-fit ba siya sa criteria. Okay? So we're talking about the scores. The first question, you're talking about the scores is specific naman. So anong subject, Earth and Life Science, anong intervention or anong approach ang gagawin? It's the online teaching. Ang kulang lang dito is the place or the school where you're going to conduct your study. In my case, it's in my school, Sultan Ali Dimapuro Memorial Integrated School. And then the next one is there a significant difference in the scores between the pre-test and the post-test? In here po, wala po siya. I'm in this particular question, alam mo na si action researcher hindi nagko-compare ng two groups. So he or she is using one group only, and then tinry lang po niya yung pre-test and post-test ng learnings based on the online teaching. In yung lugar, it could be, if it's a school-wide, then, or school level, school-based action research, then you can have your school. But if it's division or district, then you can mention your district or division. So what hypothesis we could make out of this? So pwede po natin gawan ng hypothesis sa second question. There is a significant difference in the scores or the academic performance in Earth and Life Science between yung pre-test natin and yung post-test natin of the learners using online teaching. And then, ano po yung null? There is no significant difference in the scores or academic performance in Earth and Life Science between the pre-test and the post-test of the learners using online teaching. So, as I have mentioned earlier, you want to nullify or reject the null hypothesis so that you will accept the hypothesis. Okay? So I hope we are all clear with it. Let's move on now to the reminder. Don't worry po, medyo, I think we are almost done with this topic. So as a reminder, dear teachers, participants, null and research hypotheses are particularly used for action research using the experimental design, where the variables of interest are quantitative in nature. So as I have mentioned earlier, I am a researcher. I am an action researcher that loves the quantitative research, because for me, having an intervention and then getting the scores of my learners is easier to identify if your intervention help the learners. But of course, both it's depend naman po sa interest natin. So reminder lang po, yung null and research hypothesis is usually used in the experimental design. If there is usually numerical data or quantitative in nature, so more likely you are going to use the null and research hypothesis. But paano naman po yung qualitative? Ito na. However, for action research using qualitative design, it is enough to present only the research hypothesis. So there's no need na po for you to have the null hypothesis. Research hypothesis would do. Okay, for example, this is an example for the qualitative research design. If a teacher wants to see the effect of group work on the social skills of learners, the research question may be stated like this. How do group activities help students develop social skills? So the research hypothesis for this particular statement would be group work helps develop friendship, cooperation, and empathy among learners. That's already your research hypothesis. Kasi yung intervention po na ginawa natin is yung group work or group activities kasi you want to know how this group activities develop their social skills. So maybe you already have in mind or based on your research na yung group activities pala could develop the friendship, cooperation, and empathy to them. Is there a need for you to have a null hypothesis on the qualitative design? No. Research hypothesis would do. Okay. So I believe we're clear. So let's just have a recap of everything that we had discussed. Again, there are 5 criteria that we have mentioned, and we have to bear in mind this criteria because this is important for you to have or for you to have a quality action research questions or a clear action research questions. First one, it should be clearly stated. Next is it should be significant, ethical, feasible, leads to making an action. Ito po yung 5. And of course, we have also discussed the 2 types of action research questions, the qualitative research questions and the quantitative research questions. And we have discussed also the hypothesis, how to make hypothesis, and what are the possible hypotheses you could make out of your research questions. So thank you everyone for today's discussion. Again, this is Warner Reponte. I am a senior high school teacher from Sultan Ali Dimaporo Memorial Integrated Schools. I'm so proud of my school. It's located in SND. To those who haven't known my school, it's located in Bauyan, SND Lanao del Norte. And if you have questions related to today's topic, you can have my personal email, which is reponte.warner@gmail.com. Don't worry po, I am responsive. That's why I'm using my personal email kasi pumapop up po siya. So wish you have a great day everyone and goodbye.